Welcome. I'm Katherine Artines. We're going to play today. The last few videos have been for the advanced user, and we talked about some heavy stuff. Push-pull, library files, things like that. This video is for everyone, to sharpen your skills using tools that surround. I'm presenting these tools in two videos. Part 1 will cover the outline tool in depth while showing you how to use symbols for fun gifts. Part 2 will cover the two types of lasso tools, Select Lasso and Stitch Lasso, and then revisit the Create Outline tool that we learned here for more advanced uses. We're going to begin with a project. During the past holidays, there was a project going around for the Baby Lock Destiny, or any embroidery machine that had the capability of grouping and combining in Embroidery Edit. Perhaps you saw it elsewhere. It was a personalized keychain, as you see here. Yes, we can create it on our embroidery machine, but because we have Perfect Embroidery Pro, we can do so much more with it. On a new screen, we'll come up to our text tool. I'll click on that, click on Screen, come over here to our properties and type the name in my text box. Arial is the last font that I played with, so that's the one showing. I'll go ahead and apply. And here we have our name on screen. It comes in over 4 inches long. I'm going to drag it to be about just 3 inches. With my select tool, I'll take a side handle and I'll click and drag, and as I drag, I am watching the lower left corner on the status bar, which is giving me the width, and I'll simply scroll in till I get to be about 3 inches. Certainly I could have come up to Properties and used the transform. We see the name, but we need to add the area that's going to wrap around the keychain to hold the snap. So here is our trick number 1. Come up to Artwork, come down to Rectangle, click and drag a rectangle. I'll select it, right-click on red to change the color. This time I will come over to Properties, Transform. Remove the check mark from Maintain Aspect Ratio because I want to control the width and height. The width, which is really in this case the length, can be anywhere from about 1.5 to 2 inches is what I've found with wrapping and so forth with your snap. I'll go ahead and put in 2 inches for this one. And then the height, I was pretty close to that. I want a 0.5, and I know that that 0.5 will allow me to put a snap in there easily. I'll go ahead and apply it. Not a great amount of change there. It's pretty accurate on my drawing. We're going to then take this rectangle, which is going to act as a spacer. Come up to zoom and bring us out to 100%, and you can see that we have the name and the rectangle. I'm going to leave the rectangle as artwork. It doesn't need to stitch. It really is just part of the trick, because here is trick number 2. You're going to select both your name and the spacer. Right-click, Create Outline. The default distance is that 0.08. I'll go ahead and leave that as it is and OK it. And you can see what we have here. It's really that easy. You simply create your name. You create a spacer, however wide and long you think you need. Select both of them, and then do the right-click Create Outline. This very versatile tool will draw a continuous line around the selected object, or in this case, the two selected objects, at the distance away from the original that is specified in the dialog box. Again, in our case, that 0.08. It really frames the object. Now let's zoom in, and we're going to delete any of the unwanted points that we have in our name. You can see that right here in the KA, I have this dip in the line. I don't really want that dip. It's not necessary because I'm going to trim around this name, so that's very tight. I'll go ahead and select the outline. I am going to change that color so it's easy for me to find it if I want to over in Sequence View. Use our Shape tool. We've used this before in many videos where it brings up the points of my line. I don't want any of this dip in the K, so I'll simply do a click and drag around those points, right click and delete. That looks good. Maybe I don't even need that sharp of a point, so I can delete just that one point. Maybe select and smooth those out a little bit here. As we come to the K, I do like this idea with the point here, but it's a little too exaggerated, so I can bring that down just a bit. I look at my other areas, and I certainly don't want this line up here between the R and the I, so I'll select it, right click, delete. I could use the delete on my keyboard as well. Let me take a look here. Those look good. I could delete this one. And again, what you're doing here is just making it a little easier for the stitching and for your cutting. You don't want anything as exaggerated that you would have to deal with that. All right, I'll come back out, use my select tool, and now that looks very good. It's still selected. Let me go in and do my right click, convert to run. I come over to my properties and make that standard a bean and apply that. That looks very nice. The other thing I really would do is come back into my text and change that density going into the properties fill, and I'm going to make that a 0.3. I like the look of that just a bit better. All right, we'll back out and take a look at our name. Remember that the spacer is just artwork. It will not stitch. So here we have the basis of our keychain. I'm going to take you through the steps that I used to create that. Just very easy to do this, but you'll have an idea as we continue to create these how they are indeed created. I have hooped a piece of tearaway stabilizer and floated a piece of marine vinyl right on that hoop, stitched just the name. Remember, the spacer's not going to stitch at all because it's artwork. And before I stitch the outline, I have taken this black piece of felt and I'm floating it under the hoop. This, of course, would be pushed over under this black area right here as a backing for this keychain, and then went ahead and stitched the remainder of the design, which is the outline. Here's something to note. Because I had this space left over, I went ahead and brought in another one that I had created of the smaller keychains and stitched it out. But you can see what happened here. I floated this piece in my second slide right here, and I floated it just for this name, thought of this afterwards, and my backing was already back there, and you can see that the reason that I put the backing in the first place is to hide the stitching from the lettering, and since I didn't do it in the proper order, or I had a great thought afterwards, you can see the stitches on the backing of that. Not a big deal. This is just for me, and I want to show you that I sometimes have a little bit of oops in my projects as well. Back to PEP. One of the advantages of doing this project in your Perfect Embroidery Pro software is that we have many more fonts available than the number offered on an embroidery machine. So let's continue to play. I am going to back out a little bit. I will select the Katherine. I know that I have the right one by checking over here in my sequence view. Come up to copy, paste, drag that down. I'm going to change the font this time, see if I can get something a little softer. We'll come over to our catalog. I can go ahead and click on that window, and I know that I am looking for cursor. These are in alphabetical order. I'll do a double click on cursor and it applies. And I see that I like the look of that. While I'm thinking about it, I'll go ahead and change the density, but I do like the look of that in the body of the name. I think too I'm going to space that out just a little bit because the cursive brings it close together. I like the body, but I don't know if I like the K, and there's always a part of me that wants to play with more fonts. So at this point, I'm going to do a copy paste again, bring that over, and in this one, I am going to back out all the body of my name, leave just the K, and having played, I know that I want the font called Isadora. Once again, alphabetical order, here it is. I'll do a double click, and this brings me into the K. I'll drag her over there, make sure that her density matches the rest of the letters themselves. Now I'm going to go back into this text box, Katherine. I need to remove the K, so I'll come up there and backspace out K, and I'm just left with the Katherine. And here is the name. And again, I'm going to select that and change the color just so that it's easier for us to see. We'll bring this up just a little bit. And I like the look of that. And here again, the fact that I have the K in a separate text box, I could bring that in. I can make it higher or lower, whatever look that I'm after for this K, I can do it. I can size just the K larger than the body of the letter. The other thing I'm going to do you notice these tiny small gaps here in the cursive? We could leave them, but I'm going to come over to our space and put in a -2, apply that, and you see that it has brought those characters just a little closer together. Again, you don't have to do that, but that was the look that I was after. Plus, I can refresh you on one of your tools. Always ready to do that. Now we have the name as I like it. Even though these are two separate text boxes, it's not going to harm what we do next. I will borrow the spacer. I don't want the text, so I'll come over here and select my artwork. I'm going to click and drag that and position it as I'd like it to be. Now we're going to select all three of those, do a right click, create outline. We can leave that distance at 0.08. In this case, I'm going to make it a 0.1. We'll go ahead and do an OK. That outline is a little farther away from the lettering. Again, I would do some cleanup before I go any further. I will select all of that extra point area, hit the delete on my keyboard, see if there's anything else that I might want to do here. If I wanted the remainder of this bottom to be straight, I could select all of those points and delete them. Have a little jog there at each end. I think I like that look. I might take care of some of these small indentions, take care of that. That looks good. And now, having selected that, we would do a right click, convert to, run. Certainly I could change it to the bean that I normally do, but you also have the option to come in and choose a motif. We have many to play with. If I was looking for one that might be appropriate for this particular one, let me take a look at 151 and apply it. That's a little big. Let me go back to maybe 142 and apply. That seems to work a little better. But because I knew I was going to put a motif in here, that's why I used the distance of that 0.1. So that I had extra room for that motif. It wasn't as close as my line. But you can see here that there's no right or wrong. It truly is the look that you are after. All right, let's back out even a little bit more. I'm going to select just the K, do a copy paste, drag that over here. I'm going to do two things with it. First of all, let's change that initial to an M. I'm going to go into my font catalog and find the one to play with is our fancy script, and I will apply that. I'm going to make it just a little bit bigger, come into my transform, and the height, in this case I will turn on my aspect ratio. The height I'm going to make at 1.2. We'll go ahead and apply. I'll change the color of that so that it's easy for us to pick our items that we want. And here I want to select just the spacer, and if I feel that it's too tight in there for me to actually select it with my mouse, I can always come over here, make sure that I have the correct one with my artwork, select it, click and drag it over to my M. We're going to get a different look here, so I will come up to rotate and flip that baby twice. I'm going to size this spacer a little differently. Perhaps I'm not going to use a key ring or a snap. Maybe I'm going to use a chain. So we'll come over here, and in this spacer, I'm going to remove the aspect ratio, make the width of it to be a 0.25 and the height of that to be a 1.4. We'll apply that. It is narrow. I'll drag it back into position and select both of them. And this time, before I actually create my outline, we're going to come up here and I want to center them both on their horizontal center. So these buttons come in handy quite often. Now that spacer is above my M. With those two selected, I'll do a right click, create outline. I am going to make that a 0.09, just a little bit bigger than we've been playing with. I have a additional space in there. With that artwork selected, I'll change the color, right click, convert to run, and make that my bean stitch and apply it. And here we have another look to a keychain. We can do it horizontally, we can do it vertically. Again, I probably would go into that M and change my density to a 0.3 and apply that. I like that look. Making this one change by putting the spacer narrower, we can then create what I like to call charmers in addition to our keychains. I'm going to borrow this spacer, so let's click on the spacer, do a copy, come into a new screen, do a paste. I'll back out just a little bit. We don't need to have that right on us. And I will drag this out of the way for just a moment. With this smaller spacer, let's go get the perfect small designs that are built right into PEP. They are called symbols. Are you familiar with them? I use them all the time. We'll click on our drop-down arrow and choose Select. We are brought into the catalog where we would see 276 symbols in this catalog. There are 22 of them that are new in the latest version 9.35, so do be sure to update. On Eileen's blog, all you have to do is search for symbols and you'll see some other uses. 2, for an upcoming Dime magazine issue, I did a project using symbols as an unconventional monogram, so watch for that. I think it came out cute. Going back into PEP, we're going to choose the apple. We'll OK it. And as I'm brought to screen, do you notice that the mouse symbol has turned into a crosshairs, which indicates that I am ready to do a click and drag, and I can rotate, and there is our first symbol. Notice now that I've drawn one, I'm still in the create symbol mode. My mouse is still that same indicator, so I could continue to click and drag, and notice that I can make them as large as I'd like and continue to do so. What will turn off this drawing pattern is to do a right click. This large one is selected. I'm going to come over here and turn on my 3D so that you can see. Sometimes in your drawing you might make these symbols very large, and you need to remember that most of them have a portion of the design that is in a satin stitch, and if you get it too large, you may need to deal with the satin. They come in grouped. We would need to come up here to ungroup, and then having done so, I can select just the green area of that apple. If I expand it, I can choose just the satin portion of that. Come up to our properties. I see that the standard is the satin. I go into my pattern choices and I could pick any of the others and apply it, and then I have avoided that risk of the satin stitch being too large. That either might come in to a split satin or once again too large, and we run the risk of it snagging. All right, that's how we create them. I'm going to go ahead and select all of those apples. That was just for play, and delete them. We're going to go back into symbols, select them, and this time I'm going to find our cupcake. They are in alphabetical order, so if you know the one you want, it's very easy to find them. I'll double click on my cupcake. Once again, I'm going to click and drag and rotate until I am happy with that design. I know that I want this cupcake to be 3/4 inch high. I will put back on my aspect ratio, change the height to 0.75 and apply that. Here is my spacer. I know that I already have that narrow, and I can go ahead and position that as I want it. Now, something about this spacer, notice where I'm putting the end of it. If I put the end down here into the cupcake, and I can, this does not have to be as long as the other ones. Notice that the shape then will come up to this point of the cupcake and then go straight. If I drag that up a little higher, then the shape is going to come in and make that little bit of a dip in there for the icing. So again, not crucial, but just so that you understand what is happening, I'm going to select everything on my screen, make sure that they are centered. So I'll come over to horizontal center align, and I did a pretty good job there. There was very little movement. And once again, I will select all, right click, create my outline, and OK it. And here again, I have the outline going around. I have just a little bit of dip in there for my cupcake. I could come into my shape tool, do whatever might be necessary. And at this point, I simply might right click and smooth those up just a bit. You saw what happened there. Get a drag so I get those side pieces and smooth them. Just a little bit of change right there. I could get rid of these so that I don't have any chance of that being a wobbly line. Same here, a little bit of wobble, so I could delete both of these lines here. So I'm just straightening things up again. However much time you spend here is your choice. We'll go ahead and come back out. I will select that, right click, convert to run, and you can tell that I like the bean. I do most of these on the marine vinyl, so the raw edge works very nicely for that. And here we have one of our charmers. These are just very fun to do. Let's try a second one. We'll come back up here to symbol. I'll do a select. Notice that the last symbol we had chosen is the one that is highlighted, so it takes us right back to where we were in the list. I'm looking for lips. I'll drag down just a bit here. Lips 01 is the one I like. You remember that with the cupcake and the apple, I did a click and drag to size. I can also simply just click on the screen and my lips become available for me. I'll right click, select those lips, come into my transform to set the size. My maintain aspect ratio is on. I'm changing the width to be a 1 inch, and that height is just about a 0.6. I'll go ahead and apply there. That looks good. Something else I'd like to do is to come into the fill. I'm going to change my pattern to be the pattern 2 and change my density to a 0.3. Apply. And you can see the interesting look that I get by using that second pattern. It gives me a little bit of narrow satin with a wider satin, and I thought that was very interesting. I am going to rotate it just a bit. I think that's a little bit more fun. Come over to our cupcakes, select the spacer, drag that over to the lips. Once again, I can select both of them, come up to my horizontal center, and I think I like the look of that. Do a right click, create outline. Again, I made that just a little bigger, that 0.09. You could do whatever it is there that you wanted. Here is my shape. I do have some things to clean up, definitely here. These lines, take those out, take these out. Oops, that's okay. I'll select those, and then I can bring that line back out to where I'd like it to be. No reason to have this one here. And again, that looks pretty good. And what I might want to do is just do a right click and smooth some of those out just a bit. Now I will select it, right click, convert to, run, make it my favorite bean, apply that, and there I have some cute little charmers. Again, we don't have to worry about that spacer. That spacer is artwork, so we can leave it in there in our design, or if it bothers you, simply could click and remove it. Look how cute these charmers are. When you use them as identifiers for your tools when you go to class, there are so many symbols. You're sure to find meaningful ones for yourself and your friends. It really is a great gift. If we take a look here, you choose to use a chain as these charmers have them, and I would suggest a chain probably on something like that. It's a little bit more flexible on your tool, but to get that chain in there, I actually took that spacer area and folded it over and took it to the sewing machine and simply stitched a line across here. You can see it there, and again right here. On these charmers, you can see that I've done that stitching on each of them, folded it over, stitched it on the sewing machine, and then I simply used a tweezers to go through the opening and grab the chain to pull it through. If you are putting in snaps, you might want to use your awl. Chances are one came with your machine, and you punch the holes in it. I tried to show you where those holes go, putting in the snaps using your snap tool. Of course, the only thing really that you want to pay attention to there is that you get your snaps facing in the right direction, but really just a very fun project. So I hope you have fun with that. We'll come back to PEP, come into a new screen. We'll play again with the symbols. I'll go back under Select, and it is called Bird, but I think it looks very much like a puffin. And I'm going to click and drag this little guy in a pretty good size so we can see it. I'll turn on my 3D, right click to end, select all of it, come in here to Standard, and I'm just going to make it smooth, the whole bird. All right, so I don't have to worry about size and satin stitch and so forth. He is grouped, that's fine. What I'd like to do is come up and do a copy, and I'm going to paste him 5 times so that I can show you some of the other options that are available when we go into Create Outline and what they actually do. So we'll have enough of these little guys on the screen, space them apart just a little bit more probably, so we can see what we're doing here. We will select the first one, right click, create the outline, and as we've been playing, we have left that distance to be that 0.08. If you want the outline to be the exact size of the design, you would make that distance be a 0 and apply. And when we do that, if we choose our bird here, I'll just come over to sequence view and hide him for a moment. You can see that that outline is the exact size of our puffin. All right, let's try it again. Select our object, right click, create outline. If we want to play now with the repeats, we'll go ahead and leave that distance at the default. Let's do 4 repeats. Go ahead and OK. And you see what we have here are indeed the repetitive outlines, and each one is exceedingly larger at that 0.08 distance. They are individual lines. I'm going to make those red in case I need to come back and play with those at all. Let's do the same with our next puffin. Right click, create outline, leave the distance, set the repeats to be 4, but this time we're going to join those repeats and do an OK. And what you see here is that this joined repeat is actually one line. If I come over here to sequence view, you see that there is only one piece of artwork, and that continuous line is 1. Let's go back to our red repeats, and you see the same. These 4 layers of outline are considered one piece of artwork because we created them together. If I need those lines to be separate lines, with it selected, I would do a right click and come down here to break apart. Now if you take a look over here in sequence view, each one of those outlines is a separate piece, and I really could go in and change to different motifs for each of those, whatever it is that I might want to do. But you see that those repeats, they give the same similar look, but it depends on how it would be stitched out. In the red, when those are individual unjoined repeats, then you could very likely have tie-offs and knots in those. If you don't want to deal with your tie-offs, then you might consider the join those repeats so that it is one continuous line. But both of these give you a very nice echo quilting look. We'll scoot down here for our next bird, and for this little guy, we'll do a create outline. Here we'll do the same thing, the default distance, we'll do the repeats to 4, we'll go ahead and join those, but we'll use this extra item, remove selection. And as I put a check mark that in OK, I get exactly that. I have those 4 repeats that are joined, but when I asked it to remove the selected object, that puffin really is gone. It is not just hidden. This is a fun way to make quilt outlines of a design for a border or a square. We'll do our last one here. If I bring our puffin down a little bit and I select it and I do a create outline, I will change the distance for this next one. I'm going to make it a 0.03, just a very small amount. But for the first time, we're going to choose inside. I'll put a check mark in there and OK it. Let's zoom in just a bit here, and can you see, if I make that a different color, can you see how that outline is just a little bit in from the outside of the bird? So that is what happens if we put it on the inside. The reason why you might want to do that, let me continue and do a little extra here. I will go up to my artwork, choose a rectangle, and I'm simply going to draw a rectangle around my puffin. Scroll down, I'm choosing the artwork that is inside the puffin and the square I just did. Come up to my toolbar and do a combine. That is now treated as one unit. If I do a right click, convert to complex fill, you can see that puffin has been filled in. If I select my bird, I'm going to actually make him stitch last so he's on top. I select him and drag him over, you can see that it truly has left an outline of the bird. All those stitches are not under my bird. So it's one way that you can do that, put him back, as opposed to if I have my bird, I'll go ahead and create an outline that is 0 distance away. In other words, the exact distance of my bird. I'll do the same thing that I just did here and drag a rectangle. Select both my bird and my square, come up to combine, that's the trick, so that I can do a convert to complex fill. And here, if we compare the two of these, distance was set to the inside. I have a little bit of stitching that's going to go just under the bird, as opposed to there is no stitching here if I make that distance the perfect 0. And one of the things to consider here, if there is going to be any push-pull, we might add a little bit of gap into that bird. And if we anticipate the push-pull, this is one of the tricks that we could use to guard against that happening, is to have a little bit more of that stitching placed under our bird. Another thing to show you here is I'll go ahead and select our bird once again. Scroll down a bit. I'm going to copy paste him. I'll draw another rectangle around my bird. I am going to take my bird here and send him to stitch last for this situation. And again, I'll do a convert to complex fill. Let's change that to something softer here. And in this case, because I simply created the rectangle with complex fill behind the bird, we have that situation where there's no hole in there. The bird is going to stitch over that complex fill. What I could do is select my puffin. I need to make sure I have him. Do a right click and remove overlap. Now, if I take my bird and move it over, you see that I do have that hole. This hole is the same as if I did a 0 distance. If we zoom in very closely, you can see that the stitching is going right up to the edge of the puffin. And again, we might run the risk of having that be some gaps in that area. So here is just one more tool that you have. Remember, with this one, we used our create outline and set the distance inside to a 0.03. You could make it a 0.02, obviously, and have just a little bit of that stitching behind our bird so that we wouldn't have any gaps in there. I've created an example of why you might want to use some of these options. Again, playing with our puffin. I'll go ahead and open that, and it is this simulation of our puffin quilt. This could be a block, it could be the quilt, but you can see here where I've used the repeats and the continuous line as the quilting outline echo sort of stitching for the puffin, where we create the puffin in each of our blocks, and then we have the outlines in the 4 blocks in the corner. The middle one, very similar to what I showed you using that inside and the overlap situation. Here I have the puffin, we have our square. We'll select our puffin, right click, create outline. The trick there is to have it a 0 distance and we'll OK. I'll remove the puffin so you can see what we have here. We have the outline and the square. I would select both of those. I did it before, but here again it is the combine key that is the trick to this look. A right click, convert to complex fill, and in this case coming over here not to a standard but to a stipple, and I believe I used the Hilbert, and apply that, and we could make that as tight or as loose as you'd like. Maybe the density is at a 2 and apply, and that's how I got this middle block look, similar to what we did prior. But just some fun things and then some real reasons why you might want to use that create outline tool. Before we leave symbols, I'll come back into this fun screen. One of the other things that we can do is to apply our symbols to a run stitch. I'm going to create a rectangle. I'll click and drag here, select it, right click, convert to run, and as we come over to properties, we know that we have the standard type. Notice that motif is one of them, but so is symbol. If I click on symbol, I have an additional area here for pattern. I could use the drop down if I knew the name of the symbol that I wanted, or I could use the ellipse button to bring me into the catalog, and just for fun, we'll go get that cupcake again. Apply it, and you can see that it gave us the symbol following that run stitch. Now think about this, wouldn't that be a very cute frame for a label or a frame for a monogram? And you could create a little gift tag if you are giving them these charmers for their tools. You could have a match set. The gift would match. What's inside the box matches what's outside the box. So a very fun situation. Again, you could go in and use any of them, whatever would be applicable to your receiver or whatever your project requires, you can apply that. So a very fun idea as well. And what we did there is to apply the symbol to a run stitch. So yes, there are many fun and useful ways to work with Create Outline. Understanding its uses is going to give us tremendous ability to be creative.
This concludes part 1 of You're Surrounded, using your Create Outline tool and symbols. You can now create these cute personalized keychains and charmers. Here's a peek at part 2, You're Surrounded. Be sure to view that video as you'll learn the differences between Select Lasso and Stitch Lasso while creating additional cute projects. Thanks for watching. Enjoy!